Hi everybody, I'm Natalie Richards with Paint by Threads, and welcome to 2021 Arts and Crafts Conference. I was asked to provide a video and do a follow-up to embroidery and the tools that you need. Today I'm going to be going over basics of embroidery. So I've kind of come together through my years of teaching on some of the #1 things that people ask, and one of which is, what type of fabric do I use? How do you use a hoop? How do you make it tight enough? What's too tight? How to thread a needle. So we're going to go over that and some couple of basic stitches. So stick with me and here we go. Okay, so here on YouTube, I always get the question, what type of fabric am I using? What kind of fabric can you use to embroider? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Basically, you can embroider on anything from denim or linen, cotton. Something that would be a little bit more difficult to stitch on would be something that's going to have a little bit of a stretch, a little bit of a knit fabric. You're definitely going to run into some difficulty if you don't have some type of stabilizer behind it. Anything that can make it stiff from behind and then embroider it. So let's take a look at some of the fabrics that I use. So right here we have a very heavyweight linen. You can certainly embroider on this. There's no distinct perfect squares like you would see if you were doing needlepoint or cross stitch, but once there's a guideline on this, I can stitch anywhere on it. I'm going to use that guideline for putting in my stitches. Of course, we have a medium weight linen, a little bit lighter weight, and also lighter weight linen. And then we have something that's really thin. This is linen scrim. This is mainly for making kind of curtains, doing hem stitching and having it show off that beautiful finishes that you do on that. But you can embroider on this. It's going to be very limited. I've done a couple of designs where I've actually appliqued it. So I've put another piece of fabric over and then I've couched it down and kept the stitches very minimal. And it works out just fine as well. But you're definitely not going to want to put anything of great detail on here because it's just simply too open of a weave. It's stiff enough it can hold up to it, but it's not going to hold up to that. So the linen I like to get is either from Belgium or Ireland. It is absolutely beautiful. There are no hiccups, or we'll call them burps. Fabric is nice and straight and woven, very easy to stitch on. So be careful when you pick some things out. Take a look at it. Take a look at any burps or any mishaps. Anything that is going to stand out in your stitching. You definitely don't want anything to take away from that. So that's my discussion on fabrics. Let me know in your comments if you can think of any other questions you have on that. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to use a hoop. Basically what you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and unscrew this mechanism up here at the top, which is holding the two and providing tension between the two hoops. You now have a back portion and your top portion. This back portion is going to go behind your work and placed in a position where you're going to start. I'm going to go ahead and start right here. And then you're going to take your other portion and put it right over the top. Now it's not drum tight. I could sit here and pull this if I wanted it drum tight, but I want just enough give so that my hand can get underneath there and assist me when I'm putting in my stitches. Now, what a lot of beginners will do, or what I'll notice and sometimes in classes, is they will, each time they want to move it, they'll unscrew it and then move it over and then reposition it again, unscrew it to move to their new position and put it back over again. But what you need to do is only really do that once until you get a lot of stitches going on in here. But once you have this set, you can pop it off and move it into all different positions all over the fabric. You don't need to sit there and constantly unscrew it and tighten it each time that you move it. It's pretty set. Now all of that's true until you actually start getting some stitches in there. Now not only do I have the fabric that I need to worry about, but I have stitches I have to worry about as well. They can make things just a little too tight. Like right now, that will not go over everything because all of the stitching now has to fit within this hoop area. So at this point, I do need to make adjustments, and that's what this is for. I'm going to loosen it up just enough so that I can go and put my hoop over it. And it's still a little tight, so I'm going to make it just enough, just loose enough. And there we go. I'm all set to go again. Just enough tension to push up underneath that. And I love using about a 5-6 inch hoop. I have control of it. When they get a little bit bigger than that, my hands are small enough that I just don't have control over that hoop. So select something that's small. 4, 6, 5 inch, all of those will work great. I'm going to talk a little bit about thread here. A lot of times I'll get some questions that I'll ask, do I use it the way it is, Natalie, or do I need to separate it? So let's talk about that a little bit. And let's also talk about how to open up the skein and get it ready for stitching. Here we have floss. Floss comes in 3 strands. It's not twisted, it's loose. And you take off the amount that you need to work with, and depending on the pattern that you're using, it'll tell you either you need to use 2 strands, 3 strands, or all 6 strands. So this is strandable floss. What I generally work in is pearl cotton. We have pearl cotton by DMC here. This is size 5 as noted on the paper, and also the color number. And this is size 3, going up a little bit bigger in diameter for the thread, and then also followed by the color number. So I rarely work in floss. I do have a couple of kits that do use it, and it's usually for like French knots. So let's go ahead and get this cotton ready for stitching. I'm going to go ahead and just slip off the paper labels here. I don't really need this one because it doesn't really tell me anything. But I'm going to keep a hold of this one. It gives me the color number on there. And all I'm doing is I am unwinding this, and I'm finding the waist knot, which is basically holding together all the skeins. And right up at the top here at the waist knot, I'm going to cut through all layers of the thickness. Get rid of that waist knot. And then I'm going to go ahead and feed it back through my paper wrapping. And now I have my thread at a really great length. And then I also have a reference to what this color is. So now we're going to thread a needle. There's a couple of ways of doing this. With this thicker thread, a size 3, I like using a chenille needle, a size 18. And that's what comes in most of my kits that I use, unless it's finer thread that we use, then I'll probably do a 20 or a 22. I'm really fond of these bow-in needles. I have to kind of point that out because recently, probably over the last 2 or 3 years, the DMC needles have gotten very jagged kind of bars that happen right here. And each time you go and kind of work with it, you can feel it poking and providing resistance as you're stitching. So these Bowens made in France, and then also John James needles are absolutely fantastic. And that's what I put inside of my kits as well. What we're going to do is go ahead and take our pre-cut thread here, get out a skein, and we are perfectly fine with getting this wet, flattening out that thread, and go ahead and put it into our needle. The eye is big enough that you can do this. Another way to thread your needle is to use a 3-in-1 needle threader. I swear this is the hardest thing I'm going to show you. It's very difficult to kind of figure out how to do this, but there are a couple of steps, and you can, of course, rewind the video to see how to do this. You're going to take the larger end of your needle threader. This one on top is basically used for very fine, like sewing weight thread. So either one of these on the ends will work fine. You're going to insert the hook inside of the needle eye. You're going to place the thread inside of that hook, and then it's going to assist you by pulling itself in. Now, another thing to keep in mind when you're threading the needle, unlike if you were going to be sewing on a button where you might go and double up on your thread, you're not going to do that with this at all. You don't need to worry about that. All we need is basically just a single piece of that thread, and we're going to work directly with that. This is pearl cotton, so we don't separate it. And now we're ready to start our stitches. All right, so now that we have our needle threaded, let's talk a little bit about this thread and what can happen as far as twisting, untwisting, when you should change it and switch over to a new piece of thread. And a lot of that, there are, kind of, I don't know what you say, discrepancies on, is there a right way to put this in so that the thread doesn't become twisted and knotted? And other times, you know, how do you know that you're putting it in the right direction? It's funny, but the other day I went and analyzed this. I went and looked really close at it and thought, is there another way that this twist in this direction of this thread, or flipping it upside down and looking at the other thread and seeing if it twists in another direction? And you can kind of tell one twist up and the other one naturally twists down. You want to thread to where you're working with the thread twisting down. What it'll do is it'll keep your thread from getting kind of frayed a little bit less than when you're working it with the other direction. And it'll also too not get knotted. It'll keep its twist a little bit better. So I kind of wanted to point that out. If you're stitching and you find that you're getting a lot of knots or it's becoming untwisted, go ahead and take that little bundle that we made, and if you've been grabbing from a particular area and stitching and it's not working out, try grabbing it from the other side, putting it inside your needle, and you may eliminate that. It's something that you'll have to discover once you do get it cut. If your thread stays nice and neat and has a wonderful twist, by all means stitch with it to, you know, nearly the end. Unless you're going through a very rough fabric, or some of the antique fabrics that I've seen can be really rough on silk, you're going to be changing out that thread a little bit more. You're going to always want the beginning of your stitches to look the same at the end of that skein. If they start getting flat, don't have the same twist, take a moment, stop that thread, anchor it, and start on a new thread. I'm going to show you how to do all that right now. We're ready to start doing some basic stitches. I'm going to show you the satin stitch. Now, I have a video that's basically dedicated to just doing this stitch, but here I'm going to kind of go into a little bit of things that maybe I didn't necessarily in that one. One of which, when I demonstrate that one in that particular video, I did what is known as a back stitch to anchor myself. And there were a few people that had indicated that, you know, that could possibly come loose. They enjoyed making knots. And by all means, if you've been stitching and you know an anchoring method that works for you, go ahead and do it. If you're a beginner, I'm going to show you another kind of simpler way that we can get going right away with our stitches without working with that necessary no knot method. So what I've done is, okay, everybody don't freak out. I made a knot. So not like me, but I made a knot. But I'm going to end up cutting this off once I get a lot of the length of this covered and buried basically underneath the satin stitches. I'm going to get rid of this. So what I'm going to do with my knot is I'm going to put it pretty far back here. I'm going to start up here. I'm going to put my knot way back here so that once I start filling up this area, I can go ahead and cut that off. So I'm going to go ahead and come up here with my knot. It's right there in the back. I'm going to go back into my fabric. And I'm going to get going on the satin stitch. Basically, the stitch is worked from left to right. So I'm going to start up here on my corner, pull my thread through, and take a stitch down here on the right. I'm going to make sure I come just outside the guideline and make my first stitch. Come back down on the right. Now you'll notice that my left hand really comes in handy when I'm doing this. I'm taking my hand from behind and pressing up, and it's assisting me on coming up along that guideline right there. Down on the right, up on the left. Now your thread tension, you want to pull it just tight enough so that you're not basically crimping up the fabric below it, but you're also not letting those stitches kind of weave back and forth on their own. They have a place. I'm also not packing them in. As you notice, every single one of them has their own little spot for laying. Keeps it nice and neat. Now, what I tell beginners is, if you're stitching along, I want you to look at every single one of those stitches. Are you happy with it? Does it look nice? And you're going in the right direction with your stitches? Are some of them angling? Once you're not happy with one stitch, I want you to stop, take it out, and start over. All you need to do is pull your thread out, get your needle free. I like to use the head of my needle, and I pull up that one stitch and I get it out of there. Let's get that out of there. We didn't like the way it turned out. Pull it right back out. You can do that to a couple stitches if you need to. Just get it right on out of there. And then just get all threaded back up again and put in that stitch in a way that you like it. I'm going to go ahead and work on this and get a few stitches in here. I'm going to show you how we're going to cut out that knot, and how you'll notice if we flip this over to the back, I'm covering all this thread. It's going to have an inch. So basically now, once I get enough of this covered, I can go and cut off that knot. So at that point, it's considered a waist knot. It's not something that's going to stay there permanently. We can get rid of it. In fact, once we just get a few more stitches, I think I can go in and just cut that off right there, and we won't have a knot. So let me get a few stitches in here, and then I'm going to show you how to end this thread and start a new one. So here I am. I've been working toward the end of my thread, and what I wanted to point out to you guys was, see how it's just getting a little bit fuzzy right there? I don't like that. It's a little bit ragged compared to what it looks like here. I think one of the most important things you can do in embroidery is being consistent. Being consistent with stitch length, with your thread tension, and then also with your thread. So I'm going to pull out this little bit right here. I did that on purpose and made that messy. We're going to get rid of that. We're gonna move it over here to the back. Even that one I'm not real wild about. I'm gonna pull it out. We're gonna flip it over here to the back, pull out that last one, and we're gonna end our thread. So let me go ahead and get this fed into my needle. I'm gonna take this now and I'm gonna run it up the back. A good 1.25 inches is all you need to really secure that. If I was working in, say, silk, which was a little bit more kind of have a slipperier feel and things can kind of get loose, I might actually even go a second time back in this direction and get it anchored back there, not pull all the way through. I'm going to take my embroidery scissors and I'm going to clip it close. That's how I end my thread. Now to get started on a new piece of thread, I'm going to go ahead and get a piece and thread it. I'm going to flip my work over to the back. This is the only time, by the way, in surface embroidery that you do need to access the back of your work. It's with starting and stopping your thread. I'm going to go ahead and get that. I don't need to pull it all the way through. I'm going to leave that little tail because I can cut that later on. I can even make it a little bit longer. And I'm going to go ahead and start off exactly where I left off, working from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. Now, when I pull here, I have to be very careful because there's nothing really holding this thread in. And just till I feel it give a little bit and I caught it, I'm going to go ahead and go down on my right and back up on my left, just like I ended and started. And that is it. That's how you start and end your embroidery floss. And you'll notice that that all looks very consistent. Here's another very basic stitch to get started with your embroidery, and that is stem stitch, or I think it's also called the vine stitch. We're going to go ahead and flip over to the back of our work. We're going to feed our needle through all of this other stitches back here versus making a knot. It'll keep everything all nice and neat in the back. I'm going to outline this area that I just filled with satin stitch. Pull myself up here. I'm going to be working the stem stitch just right along this area right here. Let's go ahead and insert our needle about 1/4 inch away from where we first came up. And we're going to come back not to the area we just came up, about halfway, about 1/8 inch right there. We're going to go ahead and pull that through. Sorry, we got our other thread caught in there. And that's how we start that stitch. Make sure it's on the left-hand side. And now all our stitches are all going to be the same length. I like to work just slightly over about 1/8 inch, especially on this finer thread. And we start getting that wonderful, sweet little twisted area. You'll notice that I am going right into the exact same hole. Coming right back up into that same hole right there. Pushing through, keeping my thread. I'm using my thumb to kind of hold that thread out of the way and keeping it on that left-hand side. 1/8 inch, that's a little bit more. Coming up into the same hole and pulling that right through. So let's say I want to go ahead and end this stitch. How do I do that? What you're going to do is you're going to take a stitch down. You're not going to come back up this way though. You're going to go straight down. Let's go ahead and flip over our work. Let's just pretend that we've come to the end of this and we need to add a new thread. That's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead, end it by going up through all of those stitches again. Of course, you're going to take your scissors and clip it close. And then now we need to start where we ended off. So we're going to go ahead and start a new thread. Going to flip over to the back of our work again. We're going to go through the existing stitches right to the area where we're going to be adding in that stitch. Come back up here. Let's go to the front. Now, right in between, remember how we didn't go back up into that stitch, how we went straight down? You're going to start right at that stitch that never got basically the needle put into that same hole. We're going to start right there, right into that same hole, come up and be gentle not to pull out your thread, and we're going to get going in the same exact manner, going right into that hole. Same hole right there. And that's it. Well, thank you, everybody. I hope you found this educational and are willing right now to go ahead and pick up embroidery and start stitching. Again, you can view a lot of different kits that I have. A lot are for beginners and include the stitches that we just learned today and went over. So visit me at paintbythreads.com. And of course, for the entire month of February, we have the virtual arts and crafts conference going on as well. So stop by there and take a look, or even register. We have the whole rest of February to do that. So if you enjoyed this and look forward to seeing other videos that I do, please subscribe, and I will see everybody later. Thanks, bye.